this hearing on the Atchafalaya Basin. The Sierra Club is a national organization that's dedicated to the protection of our natural environment and also the enjoyment of our natural environment. A few years ago, the Sierra Club began what we call our eco-regions program. We're located in the southeastern U.S. eco-region, and a major part of this eco-region has been identified as extremely worthy of protection. These are the wetlands, and in particular the hardwood forests and other wetlands of the Atchafalaya Basin. As part of this eco-region program, the Sierra Club is dedicated to developing a plan by which this Atchafalaya Basin can be protected. And this is part of a long-term plan that has been developing over the years, beginning as far back as the early 80s, when a master plan was developed whereby the Corps of Engineers and other agencies would protect the basin from major impacts and environmental distresses. A lot has been done since then, but we feel that a lot can also, or a lot still needs to be done. So one reason to have this hearing is to give the various agencies that are involved with this Atchafalaya plan a chance to make presentations, and then also to have you, the public, make comments as to what you would like to see done in the Atchafalaya Basin. We'll also give you an opportunity to ask questions of the various panel members. I'd like to point out that there are two different kinds of cards that you will need to fill out if you want to either make a presentation or ask a question. If you picked up an agenda when you came in the door, you'll see that there are three parts to this program. We'll begin with presentations from our panel members. Then we will allow the public and any of you that would like to make presentations. We will be limiting your presentations to 3 minutes, however. And I will emphasize that I will be watching my watch, and I'll try to keep you very closely to that time schedule. So do not be offended if I cut you off. There will probably be a lot of people that want to make presentations, and I will not be reluctant to cut you off if you go over 3 minutes. We will also give you an opportunity to ask questions of the panel members, but we will only accept questions in writing. So again, if you want to ask a question, please fill out one of these cards. There's also a place to designate which panelist you would like to answer the question. Or if you want to, just leave that blank and we will give the option to the panelists as to who might prefer to answer the question. I might also comment that this is the second of 2 public hearings that we are having. A week ago, we had a meeting in Lafayette. It was very well done. I think we can compliment all of the panelists on their presentations. I think everyone that was there was delighted with the information that was disseminated at that meeting. We all came away excited about what the prospects are for the Atchafalaya Basin. And I think we can expect more of the same this evening. I think we will all learn a lot about what is being done and what can be done to save the Atchafalaya. Okay, the first speaker on our panel is representing the Sierra Club. Charlie Freiling is a faculty member here at LSU and has also been a longtime champion of the Atchafalaya, has been working diligently over the years to do his part to save the Atchafalaya, and he's an excellent person to give the Sierra Club viewpoint on what needs to be done. Charlie.
Thank Thank you. As chair of the Sierra Club's Atchafalaya Campaign Committee for Delta Chapter, I first would like to thank my fellow panel members for taking their time tonight to be with us to help get to you, the public, the information on the Atchafalaya. And I'd also like to thank you for being here, because it is only a concerned public that can truly save the Atchafalaya and keep it wet and wild. Wet and wild. That is the focus of what we're looking at tonight. The wet and wild parts of the Atchafalaya, particularly the wet and wild parts of the Corps' plan. I think we all realize that the Army Corps of Engineers has been working diligently on levees, on the center channel, channel training, channel realignment, and they have been doing quite a good bit of work on the flood protection, flood passage parts of the basin. Much of that is also a part of the green aspects, so they have been involved with that. But there are some parts of the Atchafalaya plan that are the wet and wild aspects, and that's the focus of our discussion tonight, what we're trying to look at. Historically, work on the Atchafalaya Main Channel project stopped in the late 1960s due to lack of funds. This was after several years of low water, and the Congress had changed their priorities, and then NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, was passed in 1970. The Corps needed to reinitiate its project, and so they did a very unusual and outstanding thing. They made an agreement with the National Wildlife Federation. This agreement was the kind of agreement that said that the Federation would not, contest work that was being done on the Atchafalaya, works that would allow for the passage of flood waters and for flood protection. If the Corps, in their planning process and their environmental impact statement process, would do an interagency, interdisciplinary, multi-purpose approach to planning and design for the Atchafalaya. And they went forward doing that. Many of the agencies tonight were a part of that. Some of them were not, but all the agencies tonight are a part of protecting the Atchafalaya, keeping it wet and wild, and protecting the natural qualities of the basin. In 1978, the Fish and Wildlife Service courageously and with the weight of extensive rationale proposed the acquisition of all private lands in the basin, approximately 443,000 acres for a fish, wildlife, and multi-use area. These lands and waters would have been managed with the basic objective of preserving the floodways, wetlands character, while allowing full public enjoyment of its fish, wildlife, and recreational resources. The proposal represented the environmental summit, supported by many, including myself, while the other extreme was the Corps' own Mississippi River and Tributaries project approved back in 1928, which called for a 100,000 square foot channelization right down the center of the Atchafalaya and allowed for development to occur on the drained lands from this trench. There would be obviously a stalemate between those two conflicting views. The Corps put together an interagency task force, put together a plan, respecting many people's desires and work. Congress passed that plan about 9 years ago. The Corps has been, as I said earlier, working on the flood parts primarily of that plan. And we found by looking at what was going on that many of us didn't know what was being accomplished. First off, we didn't really have a plan. These are the documents for the feasibility study that went in, feasibility and environmental impact study that went into the Atchafalaya plan. If you read it, it's tough. How do you know which is approved, what isn't? So we need some kind of documentation that allows us to know how we're progressing, how in fact we are saving the basin. We do know, in fact, that some lands are being acquired for public access in the Atchafalaya. Have a little outline here of some of the accomplishments, checklists so far. In the 1985 plan, it was proposed that we have 50,000 acres set aside for public access for commercial fishermen, private fishermen, sports fishermen, people going bird watching, all of us. To date, 1994, 16,000 acres have been acquired. That is good, but it is not up to the 50,000 that is projected. Also in the compromise agreement, there was an agreement to have 20,000 acres of cypress tupelo lands. We found out Thursday that cypress tupelo were the cheapest lands in the basin. And so we kind of wondered, well, where are they? Why not go for them first? We don't know exactly what numbers we should be going at, because if you start off with a figure of 500,000 and add up and subtract all the numbers, we get lost with numbers. It sure would be good to start off with a ownership pattern and what are the public and private rights in the Atchafalaya. Those lands that are not being acquired for public access, we are acquiring developmental or environmental easements over those lands. Some 365,000 acres. The Corps has bought, again, 16,000 acres of easements. Some of us argue that those easements do not meet the original compromise agreement. They may have to be purchased again or renegotiated again because they don't meet the standards as to where the easements are right now. Throughout the basin, the consultants for the project came up with the idea of water management units. The water management units were designed to keep the historic flow of the Atchafalaya so that we could go fishing, canoeing, commercial fishing, etc. One unit was chosen, Buffalo Cove, as the unit to act as a test. We're not finished with Buffalo Cove, so we don't know the testing procedure as to how our manipulations in the basin work. Are we able to keep the historic water regime? We don't know. We do know some areas are filling. Recreation facilities in the basin, if you look at Appendix F, which is this many pages and a lot of detail on recreation, we boil down to this many units. Developed campgrounds, 3 of them, none have been done. Primitive campgrounds, read this and we come up with 7. Read what was presented to us Thursday and we have 3. Visitor Center, 1. Boat launch, 2 lanes, 8 of them. Boat launches, 5 lanes, 7 of them. Wouldn't it be nice when we're looking for a parking place to have those extra boat launches out there and available? Nature trails, special and unique areas. Originally, we had some green belts on the plan. They have been dropped. Those green belts allowed for protection of timber 300 feet from the water course. Our easements today only call for 200 feet of protection. I think many of us would like to see the wet and wild aspects push forward. And I hope that that will be the case as we move forward. And certainly I know that the Sierra Club would be anxious to help out any way we can to promote the protection of the wet and wild areas of the Atchafalaya.
She is a project manager with the Real Estate Division, New Orleans District.
Good evening. As Mr. Fryland said, the project was authorized in 1985. Funding for the acquisition was made available in 1988. The goal of the feasibility in 1982 was to acquire the entire 595,000 acres in the lower Atchafalaya. This is comprised of 150,000 acres of the state-owned land, 30,000 acres of the land donated to the state by Dow Chemical, and for the port to purchase 23,000 acres. This would be combined with the 12,000 acres purchased by the state for the Sherburne Wildlife Refuge, and an additional 15,000 acres purchased by the Department of Interior for the Atchafalaya National Wildlife Refuge. This would leave the remaining 365,000 acres of flowage, developmental control, and environmental protection easements, which would prohibit the conversion of land, the construction of new structures and permitting of camps, and the clear cutting of timber. In 1991, a change came about. It was requested by the state and others that we stop our acquisition and review what we were doing. It was said that we were not meeting the environmental intent as set out in the feasibility, and it was widely recognized by the state and federal agencies as inadequate, that it would lead to an extensive and prolonged litigation. In July of '91, the President of the Mississippi River Commission told us to stop and reevaluate. The objective was to develop an easement that could be reasonably acquired, simple and not objectionable to the landowners or the environmental community. With this, compromise results came about. It was decided that the Corps would purchase 50,000 acres. Of this 50,000 acres, 12 to 20,000 acres would be ball cypress to below gum swamp for more protection. And also that the easement in the wording needed to be restrictive. It would prohibit any timber operation which would involve the removal of ball cypress, removal of oak, ash, and sweet trees less than 16 inches in diameter. Of course, exceptions to the timber harvesting restrictions would be allowed by permit. The Corps submitted this supplement for acquisition in 1992, and it was just approved January of this year so that we could continue our acquisition. To date, we have purchased 15,000 acres of fee and 16,000 acres of easement. The easements has to be reacquired to make sure that those that we acquired, that the landowners go under stricter guidelines. The state is currently managing our land under an annual license, and after additional acreage is acquired, the license will be renewed for a longer period of time. The Corps is ultimately responsible for enforcing the provision of lands acquired and will seek injunctions for damages when violations are detected. The recreation feature does involve developed and primitive campgrounds, visitor centers, boat launches, interpretive trails, special and unique areas. In July of '94, the state gave a letter of interest for the development of the plan. We are presently working on developing this plan with the state. The state will be required to purchase an additional 1,500 acres, and the construction will be cost shared with the state 50-50, and the operation and maintenance of this feature will be turned over to the state. Initially, 13 management units were studied. It was decided that the best way would be to determine the feasibility of restoring the historical overflow conditions to benefit aquatic ecosystem, encourage water movement through the management areas, and reduce sediment deposition. At the time, 5 units were decided to be the greatest for accomplishing this goal. It was decided, though, that the best place to start would be Buffalo Cove. A prototype was designed for the northwest portion of Buffalo Cove, being the Bayou Eugene area. The prototype model test consists primarily of removing sandbars at the head of Bayou Eugene, clearing and snagging a 10,000-foot section, making 3 cuts in the east bank of the bayou and 2 cuts in the south bank. A monitoring program will be put in place to evaluate the effects of the flow patterns, sediment deposition rates, and water quality. This work started earlier this month and should be completed in early December. The results will be the design of the full management unit. Although the Corps it appears is moving slowly, we have many restraints. We have acquired 16,000 acres of both fee and 16,000 acres of easement. We have to reacquire that, which also involves now an HTRW permit from landowners. The hazardous, toxic, radioactive waste permits are not exactly the things the landowners want us to do. The willing concept is causing us great problems in the fee acquisition. The Corps does not have the right to condemn if the landowner does not want to sell at fee. This restricts us from buying the ideal lands to protect the ball cypress, et cetera, that we would have. We are putting contracts in place. We are working with the state on management plans. We have entered into a 25-year license with the state for the wetland waterfowl enhancement project, which would develop moist soil units to sustain ducks on the Mississippi flyway. We are hoping to have our acquisition completed by the year 2013. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Next on our panel is the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. Representing that agency this evening is Mr. Quinn Kindler, who is Special Projects Coordinator.
As our moderator has pointed out this evening, most of the panel is here to describe their agency's role in the Atchafalaya Basin. With that in mind, tonight I'm going to take the opportunity to represent 2 factions of the state of Louisiana. The first will be the Department of Natural Resources, and the second will be a few words basically from the governor's office. DNR has several offices and divisions which affect the Atchafalaya Basin. Within DNR's Office of Coastal Restoration and Management, the Coastal Management Division has two primary functions within the Louisiana Coastal Zone. The Louisiana Coastal Zone overlaps the Atchafalaya Basin in an area that is bound by Highway 90 on the north, the east and west guide levees of the floodway, and out through the deltas, out to the 3-mile line in the Gulf of Mexico. The two functions that Coastal Management Divisions has within this area of overlap is, number one, implementing a coastal use permitting program whereby any proposals for development or other uses within the basin have to receive a permit through the department. The second is to conduct a federal consistency program which allows the Department of Natural Resources Coastal Management Division essentially to oversee actions taken by the federal government in the basin that is primarily the Corps of Engineers to ensure that those federal actions are consistent or in sync with the state's coastal use program. In that realm, the federal consistency activities of the department hinge primarily on working with the Corps of Engineers to develop dredge material disposal plans for maintaining the Atchafalaya River channel. In that line, the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and the Department of Natural Resources have, over the last several years, been very effective at coming up with successful plans to create wetlands using dredge material in the Atchafalaya Delta. Also, within the Office of Coastal Restoration and Management, the Coastal Restoration Division operates a program whereby we attempt to restore, create, enhance, and protect coastal wetlands. In that program, we basically have two projects that are scheduled to be constructed in the Atchafalaya, both of which are in the Atchafalaya Delta, both of which are designed to reestablish the natural flow patterns to create some additional delta wetlands in the Atchafalaya. Final function of the Coastal Restoration and Management Office is to assist the Governor's Office for oil spill response. Our duties are very minor in this area and is one of basically supplementing the Governor's Office when we're called upon. DNR's Office of Conservation administers regulatory programs to prevent the waste of oil and gas and the drilling of unnecessary wells, to permit injection wells, also the regulation of transmission pipelines and oil and gas pit closures. Those are a brief summary of the department's role in the Atchafalaya, and now I would like to spend a few minutes covering some of the items that are also accomplished essentially temporarily anyway through the Department of Natural Resources by the Governor's request that Mr. Dave Swallow represent the state and represent the Governor's office on matters dealing with implementation of the Corps of Engineers flood control project in the Atchafalaya Basin. On behalf of Mr. Swallow, who cannot be here tonight, I will try to explain that role. That role means basically coordination to the greatest extent among all the state agencies that are potentially involved with the Corps in this plan. The agencies, some of which are represented here tonight, State Land Office, DEQ, Wildlife and Fisheries, but also the Department of Agriculture and Forestry and DOTD in some cases. In recent years, the state has attempted, and in many cases, actually had very much success in either directing or redirecting the Corps in some cases in the implementation of the Atchafalaya Floodway System project, more specifically the compromise plan that was referred to earlier. A major 2-year effort was needed to essentially rewrite the environmental protection easements for approximately 350,000 acres. The reason for that was to reinstitute the balance between the environment and the timber and landowner interest in the basin. At some point in time, those balance had been lost. The state stepped in and said, time out, let's go back, take a look at it, and try to re-elevate or reinvent that compromise that was once there. As Marie reported, that was successful. There has been a revision of those easements, and the Corps will be going back to repurchase some of those easements that have already been purchased. The state was also part of the effort which led to the Corps reevaluation of the 50,000 acres of public access. And the Corps will, as has been reported earlier tonight, purchase a full 50,000 acres in the basin. The state has and will continue to participate in the prioritization of the location of that acreage. The state has provided the Corps with some suggestions. One of our #1 priorities for acquisition in the basin is to add to the 16,000 acres that have been purchased in the area of the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area and the Atchafalaya National Wildlife Refuge, essentially to fill in the gaps and round out some of the boundaries and provide better access to those lands that have already been purchased. Again, that relies on willing sellers. When willing sellers become available in that area, that would be the state's #1 choice for acquisition. Additionally, we are very supportive of acquisition of bald cypress and tupelo gum, and there may be anywhere from 12 to 20,000 acres of that, again, depending on where willing seller acreage is available. A third priority would be simply to purchase another large tract of land, probably in the mid to late successional bottomland hardwood habitats, somewhere in the basin. Again, waiting on identifying willing sellers for that purchase. As mentioned before, we also are continuing to work with the Corps to develop their master plan, which will not only incorporate plans for those public access acres, but also some recreational features. The governor recently, earlier this summer, declared the state's conditional interest in working with the Corps and being the non-federal sponsor for a future recreational plan for the basin. In the near future, we also anticipate the development of what is called a project cooperation agreement, which will be a formal link, a formal agreement between the state of Louisiana and the Corps of Engineers to solidify the relationship between the state agencies and the Corps. Presently, each of the state agencies and the governor's office is working with the Corps basically on just a gentleman's type agreement. There's nothing in writing that says that what each agency shall be responsible for. We think that the PCA, once developed, will help solidify that relationship and bring us to a better solution, better mechanism for solving some of the problems that we face. We do anticipate the governor's office playing a key role in working with the various departments to bring the state together to form a unified position. And we look forward to that happening hopefully within the next 12 to 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. Next is the Louisiana State Land Office, represented by Ron Fleiper. His position is Public Lands Field Officer, and in that position he oversees the management of state lands and water bodies.
Good evening. For those of you unfamiliar with the functions of the State Land Office, here's a little overview. When Louisiana became a state in 1812, the federal government examined the pre-existing claims, being primarily French, Spanish, and English grants, eliminated some, approved some, and proclaimed the remaining acres of Louisiana public land. Some land was granted to railroads, more was sold to individuals by federal patent. The rest was transferred to Louisiana, and the State Land Office was created in 1844. Since that time, the original severance of every acre of land in Louisiana has been recorded in the state tract books. A fact nearly unique about our state is that all of the federal records of land transfers prior to the creation of the land office were also transferred here, and thusly, we retain all related patents and other documents concerning the original sales of all properties in Louisiana. We are also the keeper of all the original U.S. Surveyor General's township surveys and accompanying field notes, which make the State Land Office invaluable to title researchers and those from related landman positions, in addition to genealogists and other history buffs. In addition to severance and survey records, the State Land Office maintains a program called SLABS, or State Land and Building System, which is a database backed by over 6,300 hardback documents, which contain data concerning over 1 million acres of state agency-owned land and 10,000 state-owned buildings. Records of all sales, transfers, ID numbers, etc., plus plats and details of square footage and facilities are made primarily as an aid to facility management for maintenance and replacement and to assist in the appraisal of properties for transfer or insurance purposes. The State Land Office functions by statute as the receiver of all applications for state mineral leases. We process these, meaning we perform all office facets of engineering, surveying, writing of tract descriptions, checking title to land or water bottom tracts, calculating state acreages, preparing all plats and maps, advertising in state and parish journals, and preparing notice booklets for all mineral lease sales. The Mineral Board awards leases, then we prepare the leases, execute and record them. We retain all the original leases and maintain exclusive maps which show all current and historical tracts. The mission of the State Land Office in the basin is a multifaceted one. Our land and water bottom section maintains files on all the various types of land we manage, being non-severed, donations, old lake beds, tax adjudicated lands, school lands, and since the inception of Act 282 of 1989, underutilized lands belonging to other agencies. Regular inspections are made of these properties and recommendations for best use management are filed as public record. Grants of particular use often transfer management to other agencies when this is advised. At this point, definitions of the various types of state-owned lands might be helpful. One, non-severed lands are those which for one reason or another were never sold from the state tract list. Usually these are properties that are less than desirable, difficult to access, and often landlocked. Some remain in the tract book because of failed homesteads, canceled patents, or the like. They range in size from 0.04 acres to several hundred in the marshes of South Louisiana. Non-severed lands in the Atchafalaya Basin amount to just over 900 acres, composed of about 25 scattered pieces. Field personnel inspect and place signs, state land signs, on these properties annually. Timber and land values are generally very low, but we often encounter adverse claimants, even though these of all properties would be the most difficult to obtain or to claim legally. Most often, hunting clubs with adjacent leases try to include these lands in their hunting grounds. The sale by the state of non-severed properties requires legislation and is seldom initiated. Two, the state sometimes receives donations of property from private individuals and corporations, and the most significant of these is the Dow Chemical donation of 1981. This agreement gave the surface rights of some 55,000 acres to Louisiana, while Dow retained the mineral rights. Many of these properties have never been surveyed, have dual and or undivided ownership, and some are adversely claimed. Much of this stems from the fact that Dow acquired vast tracts of land from timber companies and land companies which had made their original purchases in the days of meets and bounds and other less than desirable land descriptions. I note that in the Corps of Engineers master plan for the basin, Dow donation lands are enumerated as about 30,000 acres actually within the basin, and most of this is accessible to the public through our office. The Dow donation is a boon to the outdoorsmen of the state, for it provides areas for hunting, crawfishing, camping, bird watching, and other pursuits with no restrictions other than those imposed by game laws and those of good stewardship. We ask the public not to cut trees and keep these properties as clean and natural as possible. These lands also are marked annually, and their signs are usually promptly torn down. A stipulation of the Dow donation was that the State Land Office would honor several large campsite areas on Dow lands by allowing the campers to retain and renew their leases under applicable state laws. Thus, the State Land Office became the landlord, if you will, for communities of Cow Island and other scattered locations. These leases are authorized under the unadvertised squatters lease, being revised statute 41:1222, if they meet certain requirements. New leases on Dow lands and other lands are authorized by revised statute 41:1211 and are advertised for 3 weeks in the parish journals before public bids are accepted and opened. Usually, additional campsite areas are open only when, one, squatters do meet legal requirements, and two, the state feels perhaps the need to strengthen title to a disputed area with an area with adverse claims. The third major category of state-owned lands in the basin is that known as dried lake beds or accreted land. Article 9, Section 3 of the state constitution states that the legislature shall neither alienate or cause to be alienated the beds and bottom of navigable waterways. When the levees were erected around the basin, the nature of many waterways owned by the state were radically altered. Thus, when, for instance, Grand Lake shrunk from its mammoth original proportions to its current size, many acres of lake bed became dry land belonging to Louisiana. However, many private landowners with adjacent properties, and aided by a 1964 Supreme Court ruling, claim ownership of these lands as accretion, since the former lake now is narrow and exhibits a current, thus supposedly more resembling a river. Some cases of this type have been litigated and won by the state, such as 6 Mile Lake, but many remain. In the meantime, adjacent landowners often do not hesitate to lease these lands to hunting clubs and deny access to the public. Probably 90,000 acres in the basin fit this category. While the state land office has maps that were prepared before the levees were constructed and thus show where the original waterways would extend to, only recently have we acquired the equipment such as satellite surveying tools, which will enable us to perform the necessary locations and more accurately define these lands. Again, a major role of our office concerning the Atchafalaya Basin is that of maintaining possession by resisting encroachment of adverse claims. While in some instances the ownership of certain properties is subject to debate and litigation, as in lake-bed situations, we also deal with adjacent landowners and their hunting club lessees who tear down our state land signs and thereby discourage or deny public access to what is certainly public land. We ascertain and maintain boundaries as much as possible to control encroachment, such as unwarranted development and timber theft. The State Land Office employs 2 foresters and maintains an active timber management program statewide. Within the basin, however, timber harvests have in recent years occurred only as a courtesy to co-owners of undivided property or through litigated compromises with other claimants. We have chosen for several reasons to not participate in the fairly extensive hardwood harvests now occurring in some parts of the basin, but paramount of these is the belief that better markets will occur and that most of our stocks of more valuable species have not reached their potential in size and value. Our inspections often reveal timber theft on state lands, and we usually are awarded double compensation for the stolen trees. All that remains in my text is a listing and brief explanation of the various rights of ways, leases, and permits issued by our office, and makes for pretty dry listening and reading, but I have copies of this information for anyone who might desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Next is the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Representing that agency this evening is Dugan Sabins, who is Environmental Quality Coordinator with the Office of Water Resources.
Thank you, Bob. It's certainly good to see such a large crowd here tonight, and I know that it's due in no short part to the efforts of the Sierra Club, and I might say Chuck Freiling in particular. And if I might digress a minute on my experiences, I saw Clyde Lockwood here earlier, and I recall in my first experiences many years ago, we were helping him put together the first video. And perhaps there's some of you in the office that can, in the audience, that can remember that Atchafalaya video. And he had one of his friends, Marty Stauffer, help do the actual cinematography. And I kind of look at it as a kind of kickoff for the modern day Atchafalaya effort, and many of you can remember that. And we helped Clyde and Marty do some videoing of a underwater scene. And as a matter of fact, I have seen that scene used by Marty Stauffer in one of his Wild America scenes, something he called Swamp Critters, I think. And that's still on the air, and I was impressed. But one of the things that happened as a result of that, Clyde had found out that we were doing some fish sampling out in the basin at that time, and he asked if he could tag along, and I didn't think anything of it, so I said, sure, come on. So he came out, and we were working Bayou Postilion. If any of you know where Bayou Postilion is, out along the east side of the basin, very, very productive area. And he was impressed, as we were, of the fish that we were collecting. And I think we ended up with something like 800 pounds of acre per estimate for that area, which is extremely large for any body of water. And about 2 weeks later, after we got back, he came up to me with a draft write-up of it. And I didn't think anything of it, and I reviewed it for him, and I assumed he was going to You might write a small article and put it in some small magazine. And about 3 months later, somebody came up with this big, beautiful book on the Atchafalaya and said, "Look, Dugan, you're on page 30-something." And I had no idea that was going to happen. And I guess the moral of that story is be careful when you take Clyde Lockwood in the field. You don't know where he'll write you up. Back on the program, though, I was asked to give an overview of the activities of the Department of Environmental Quality in the Atchafalaya. And although the department was not in existence at the time of the early Atchafalaya work, it did have a division of the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries at that time, the Water Pollution Control Division, that was in fact conducting some work in the basin. So really, DEQ's heritage does go back into the basin for quite a range. And certainly on behalf of the Secretary Bill Kucharski and my Assistant Secretary Dale Gibbons of the Office of Water Resources, I would like to say that the department recognizes the basin for its special attributes and as a unique part of Louisiana's environmental heritage. And so unique, in fact, I think, as all of us know, that we refer to it as simply the basin. And most of, I think, the unique habitats in North America have some short, simple name, and certainly in Louisiana, we just call it the basin. For management purposes, the Department of Environmental Quality recognizes the basin as being that body of land and water and wetlands contained within the continuous levee system, including the West Atchafalaya and Narragansett floodways. As we know, the river itself is levied off from its floodplain along the upper one-third of the basin from Simsport to just south of Krotz Springs, but we have included the floodways on either side in our management plans. Within the Atchafalaya River Basin, which we designate as Basin 01, the department has 12 subsegments which help us further define the basin for management purposes. And in looking over our activities in the basin, I've identified several areas here that I want to discuss with you briefly. Those include surveillance and monitoring, standards development and assessment, permitting of point source discharges, enforcement, certification of Section 404 dredge and fill permits, investigations of fish kills, spills, and citizen complaints, and the implementation recently of a non-point source program. In addition, the department works with a variety of local, state, and federal agencies to better coordinate environmental protection activities throughout the basin. Looking at some of these activities specifically, surveillance and monitoring, we have 3 historical stations that we've established along the Atchafalaya River at Simsport, Hot Springs, and Morgan City. Each station has typically been sampled for a variety of approximately 25 parameters, including such things as temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, solids, nutrients, humidity, metals, and bacteria. And the analytical results of these monitoring stations are reported in our biennial water quality data summaries. We also conduct other surveillance and monitoring activities in the basin, such as fish tissue and sediment analysis for contaminants. A second activity that I mentioned is standards development and assessment. And under the state surface water quality standards, we've identified 5 water uses for the basin and its subsegments. They include primary and secondary contact recreation and fish and wildlife propagation, which include the core of the uses that we're really concerned about here today. But there is also a stretch of the Atchafalaya River is designated for a drinking water supply, and of course in the coastal areas we're concerned about shellfish propagation on oyster grounds. Criteria are established to protect these uses, and they are listed in the surface water quality standards. Assessment of water quality conditions in the basin are conducted regularly and summarized in our biennial Louisiana water quality inventory. The 1994 inventory, by the way, showed that most of the subsegments in the basin are supporting their water uses. Permitting of discharges. There are several types of water discharge permits that we issue in the Atchafalaya. As many of you might assume the largest number are for oil and gas exploration, production, and development. And this is followed by various oil field support and service industries. We also have permits for sewage treatment plants and for general industries such as fish processing and food canning. Our permits are issued following state and federal EPA regulations and procedures to meet the appropriate technology or water quality-based permit limits. A typical life of one of our permits is 5 years, and the renewal process may include new limits based on changes in environmental conditions and regulations. Certification of dredge and fill permits. As part of the Section 404 process, the department reviews dredge and fill permits, requests for compliance with state water quality regulations. We do this in conjunction with the Corps and in the coastal areas with the Department of Natural Resources. In an average year, approximately 35 to 40 Atchafalaya Basin applications are reviewed by the department. Some discharges associated with these dredge and fill permits are required to get a regular state discharge permit. One area that brings us in very close contact with many of you in the audience perhaps is the investigation of fish kills, spills, and citizen complaints. The number of fish kills, spills, and citizen complaints received by the Department of Environmental Quality from the basin will vary from year to year. We place a high priority on them, and a report is prepared on each one. Annually, spills have ranged from, and this is from the last 5 years, and I tried to look over the record real briefly. Spills range from less than 5 to over 20 during the last few years, 5 years that is. And most involved only small amounts of material, while some have involved larger amounts that are associated with pipeline breaks and vessel accidents. Likewise, citizen complaints concerning the Atchafalaya Basin have varied in numbers from as few as 7 to over 30 per year during this 5-year review period. Complaints range from such things as problems over drainage issues to unreported spills and discharges. Natural fish kills, as many of you know, can be fairly common in the basin because of the naturally low dissolved oxygen conditions associated with such a large overflow wetland system. And certainly the large fish kill in 1992 associated with Hurricane Andrew is an extreme example of this. Man-induced fish kills have infrequently occurred in and adjacent to the basin in association with pesticide applications and vessel traffic. And we cooperate with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to a great extent in the investigation of all these fish kills. Enforcement activities. All our permits to dischargers in the basin are subject to compliance monitoring and mandatory reporting requirements for enforcement purposes. The department reviews these discharge monitoring reports for compliance with permitting requirements, and when required, appropriate enforcement actions are taken to achieve compliance. One of the last major program I want to discuss is something new on the block, but something very critical to the future of water quality as we see it, and that is the non-point source management. The department has recognized that non-point source pollution is an increasing cause of water quality problems throughout Louisiana. Technically, we define non-point source pollution as that pollution generated from diffuse sources which are not regulated as point sources and are normally associated with land use activities such as agriculture, silviculture, and urban runoff, and even runoff from construction activities. To address this problem, the department has established a statewide program. Through this program, we have identified land use acreages in the Atchafalaya Basin. We have kind of put some numbers on these categories, and they kind of fit in with what you might picture the basin to be, and that's over 600,000 acres of wetlands, over 300,000 acres of water, over 200,000 acres of forest, and 250,000 acres of forest, and 200,000 acres of agriculture. These categories have been used to help us identify where we have non-point source problems and where they're the greatest, and to develop what we call best management practices to control them. From these land use patterns, the non-point source program has helped develop and distribute to farmers in the basin appropriate BMPs for row crop farming and forestry BMPs for timber harvesting. And finally, the last thing I want to touch on is something that Bob had kind of given as a directive to the speakers, and that was interagency coordination, and I think that's an extremely critical one. The department tries to coordinate on a regular basis with local, state, and federal agencies. In environmental surveillance and monitoring, we frequently coordinate with the state departments of wildlife and fisheries and agriculture and forestry on environmental sampling results, as well as federal agencies, including the U.S. Environment Protection Agency, Geological Survey, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Army Corps of Engineers. Frequently, these coordinating activities involve discussions on management options for basin water quality. Currently, the department is working with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries on ways to improve circulation in the basin to reduce incidences of natural fish kills, such as occurred after Hurricane Andrew. The two departments also work together in responding to all reports of fish kills in the basin, as I mentioned previously. During spill events, the department coordinates with local officials, the Coast Guard, and the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to contain spills and assess its impact. Coordination is especially critical in wetland conservation activities, and the department participates in the Coastal Wetland Conservation and Restoration Task Force with the State Departments of Natural Resources, Transportation and Development, as well as the Governor's Office of Coastal Affairs. And we also have a large coordinating effort underway through our non-point source program through an interagency committee composed of virtually all state, federal, and local agencies involved in natural resource management. Thank you.
Thank you, Duke. Okay, we're now going to hear from another of those agencies that environmental quality coordinates with, and that's the Federal Department of Environmental Protection Agency. Representing the EPA this evening is Mr. Norm Thomas, who is Chief of the Federal Activity Branch.
Thank you, Robert. One of the criteria that we had from Robert and also from Charles was that we were supposed to say the same thing today that we said over in Lafayette. And I have a hard time remembering what I just said, much less what I'm going to say. So I've got some notes here, and it may be longer than the 10 minutes, because maybe it was longer than 10 minutes before. I'm not sure. I was told it was, but I don't think it was. But if you recognize Blue and I, we were sitting here, and Charlie gets up, and he's going to give his presentation, which was supposed to be what he gave in Lafayette. So we move aside, and we weren't trying to get out of the way of or hide from you folks, but he gave some slides, some beautiful slides of the Atchafalaya, which you guys are missing. That was a wonderful presentation they made, but we were back there on the other side. So he changed his a little bit, so I think maybe we can change as we go along. As well as the answers. If you have the same questions, we may change the answers. I want to certainly thank the Sierra Club for calling these citizens here. The meetings are really overdue. We started all working on the Atchafalaya years and years ago, early 70s, 72. And EPA was one of those charter members to work on those plans. We developed those multi-purpose plans, and we also developed some environmental issues that as we went through, and everyone agreed that we could go ahead with some sort of plan. It was a hard-fought battle. I mean, there was a lot of yelling and screaming over this thing. It wasn't just conversation. But as it went through, there was a pretty good plan, but it sort of bogged down. And I want to re-emphasize that it's people like you, the Sierra Club, and folks that keep the pressure on to finally get something moving. And the Sierra Club, of course, is a player in this. Another major player I do have to mention, and that is the Department of Natural Resources. And in particular, David Swallow, as was mentioned earlier, he was a driving force to get this thing moving again and moving in a direction to employ those environmental features that had been agreed upon. Historically, the lower Mississippi alluvial plain and delta from the southern tip of Illinois down through Louisiana coastal areas was about 21.5 million acres of bottomland hardwoods. There are only 4.5 million left. Much of that is in the Atchafalaya, and particularly when you're talking about contiguous section of bottomland hardwoods. The Atchafalaya is just great. Vice President Gore's National Performance Review set ecosystem protection as a primary goal of this administration. The Environmental Protection Agency, Carol Browner, has stressed that ecosystem protection must be one of our major efforts during this administration. All regions have identified those areas which we believe are of essential ecosystem. The Atchafalaya, of course, is one by the nature of bottomland hardwoods, as well as coastal Louisiana. Coastal Louisiana is a national resource and of national concern. Both of those ecosystems are priorities within Region 6 EPA. EPA has sort of changed its efforts as we've gotten into the 90s, and there are really three major efforts within the program that I'm involved with. And that is, I'm mainly responsible for Region 6 in protection of wetlands. But it's taking three areas. One is the regulatory and enforcement actions, which have been traditional, and many of you do know. The other is ecosystem protection, and the major area of concern that we have and working on is the Coastal Wetlands Plan and Protection Restoration Act. We have other geographic initiatives in ecosystem protection. And then state assistance. The state assistance is through grants, development of statewide wetlands conservation strategies, and public outreach. And I want to touch on those because we were told to tell us something about a program. The regulatory program. We all need to recognize up front that the Environmental Protection Agency is a regulatory agency. And by such, then we have to, we think regulatory. We think rules and regulations. We see a problem, and the only tool we have is a hammer, we hit it, okay? That's what we are as a regulatory agency. There is within that regulatory program, though, when you're trying to protect wetlands, some concerns that have been expressed very strongly by individuals, property owners, landowners, and politicians. And that is that there is a basic conflict between property rights and land use management when you're talking about protection of wetlands in many cases. The goal that has been defined by EPA and Congress, though, is that we will protect the waters of the United States by restoring, maintaining, and the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of those nations' waters. One of the main tools of that is through the Section 404 program, and it's jointly administered with EPA and the Corps of Engineers. EPA's role was to develop guidelines so that you could review permits as well as to review permits ourselves. We comment on those permits as they come through, and some we have an opportunity then to elevate for a higher decision if in fact we disagree with the Corps of Engineers' decision. We do that through three specific memorandum of agreement that we have with the Corps of Engineers. One is enforcement, delineation, and then mitigation. Within the Atchafalaya, we have reviewed over the past 4 years 90 permits. About 20 of those have merited some comment from EPA, and we've looked for some changes and modifications, suggested alternatives under those permits. We know of none that have been denied. We don't have any way of tracking to see if, in fact, those modifications were, in fact, incorporated. One of the reasons is And I want to digress a little bit here. I'm from Region 6, which is out of Dallas. And we have responsibility for 5 states. And that is responsibility also to work with 8 Corps of Engineers districts. One of them is the New Orleans district, which has responsibility here in Atchafalaya. That stretching is pretty thin. In addition, there are more people in here tonight than we have within EPA that are devoted nationally with all 10 regions and headquarters that address themselves as primary responsibility for wetlands protection. We have 187 that are devoted to that, out of about 15,000 employees of EPA. We look at probably 1,200 permit applications each year in our region alone. Let me touch on enforcement. One of the major tools that we have is an ability to enforce on violators to the Clean Water Act. Section 301 prohibits unpermitted discharges into the waters of the United States, including wetlands. 309 gives us the authority to issue administrative orders. That is, order someone who has violated the Section 301 discharge into the waters of the United States without a permit to restore the area. And we also have the responsibility and capability of penalize them through administrative penalties without going to court, and there's no appeal. We do work with anyone in order to try to work out agreements and settlements so that there is not a later on opportunity for them to go to court. But we tried to do that through adjustment of the environmental damages that occur, the ability of the person to pay, the economic benefits that would be occurred from that fill itself, those types of things. We take about 10 new cases each year and issue about 10 administrative orders about each year. And 9% of our cases major areas of conservation planning. You got projects that you're building, you've got a restoration plan, and the third part is the conservation. There's an opportunity that within the Act that allows for EPA to issue a grant to a designated state. That designated state agency is LDNR, to receive a grant to develop a conservation plan. And that is to have a plan to address those losses that are occurring from developmental activities. Developmental activities wherever it is, whether it's in Atchafalaya or any other place. We look forward to initiating that grant very soon to get them started to develop that conservation plan. We also give state grants. That's the third part of this major effort, and technical assistance where we can. We give about $1 million per year to the states, and some of the effort does come to Louisiana. This is our own funds, EPA funds, the Department of Natural Resources to evaluate potential state assumption of the 404 program, develop statewide conservation plans, as well as the DEQ assessment of prioritization of in education outreach, soil and water conservation commissions. The last thing I want to talk about is the message from the administrator. There is, in response to the review, the National Performance Review, Carol Browner published a new generation of environmental protection. And in it, it lists out the guiding principles of EPA over the next 5 years. This is assuming they're still going to be here 5 years. But at any rate, this will get us started. There are very good guiding principles. And they are, I'm just going to list them. Ecosystem protection is right at the top. Environmental justice, pollution prevention, strong science and data, partnerships, reinventing EPA management. We'll skip that one for a minute. Environmental accountability. And as I've gone through, and if you've heard some of the others, you will hear almost all of those. You've heard some folks talk about partnerships, the ecosystem and the value of the Atchafalaya, pollution prevention, the partnerships in particularly. There's nothing that is going to be able to accomplish unless there is full partnership between you and the agencies and that are involved with it. And with those in mind, then we certainly are going to try to work the best we can to help in keeping the Atchafalaya wet and wild. One of the things I do want to point out, though, is environmental accountability, because that's a burden on you. EPA will stress that everyone in society is accountable for protecting and enhancing the environment. That's the opening statement of that particular guiding principle. So we're holding you accountable as well as you're holding us accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. I do hope your agency is here 5 years from now. Let me pause here and remind you that if you do want to ask a question of any of the panelists, you will have to do it in writing. We will not allow any oral questions. So if you would like to hold your hand up and someone will deliver one of these cards to you. Okay, next on the panel is the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And representing that department this evening is Mr. Blue Watson, who is Biological Programs Manager of the Environmental Branch. And as he's coming to the microphone, let me also thank him as representative of Wildlife and Fisheries for allowing us to use these great facilities.
Thank you, Bob. On behalf of Secretary Herring, I'd like to welcome all of you to our facility, and we would also like to thank the Sierra Club for putting on this hearing, and thank all of you for coming out. It's great to see this kind of turnout for a meeting to discuss issues that we're all very vitally interested in. I would like very briefly to talk about the goal of the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, which is very simply to maintain to the maximum extent possible and to conserve fish and wildlife resources and habitat in the state, and that's statewide, not just in the Atchafalaya Basin. The role of the department in the Atchafalaya Basin is essentially the same as our role statewide, and that role is management of fish and wildlife resources and the habitat, monitoring of fish and wildlife populations, enforcement of fish and wildlife laws, and providing technical assistance and advice to other government agencies through various permitting processes and to the private sector in matters relating to living resources and habitat. What I'm going to do is kind of briefly run over some of the activities that the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries is directly involved in the Atchafalaya Basin, to give you an idea of what our role is and what we're doing out there. First of all, I'd like to address what we're doing on the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area. The Sherburne Wildlife Management Area is near Crotch Springs in the Atchafalaya Basin. It's about 11,780 acres. It's in bottomland hardwoods. It, in conjunction with the 15,200 acres for the National Wildlife Refuge and the Property Corps of Engineers in the vicinity, gives us approximately 42,600 acres there in that vicinity that is under management in some shape, form, or fashion by the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries through cooperative efforts to the other two agencies. There are several activities that are going on in Sherburne, but before I get to that, we just got a notice today from the Corps of Engineers dealing with some activity that's going to take place on some property very close to Sherburne, a notification of maintenance action, which basically states that at the request of the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, selected off-road vehicle trails will be maintained and abandoned camps on Corps fee title lands will be removed. We just got that notice in the mail today, something we've been working on for some time. Other activities that we're involved in on the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area, of course, primarily the active management of game and non-game animals, preservation of bottomland hardwood habitat in the area, reforestation of cleared lands in the area is required, maintenance of the shooting range out there. We have 3 ranges, pistol range, rifle range, and a skeet range on the area. We provide camping facilities on the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area. Of course, hunting and fishing is the primary activities that are going on out there. We do have 4 active research projects currently going on the Sherburne Wildlife Management Area. There is a woodcock distribution and habitat use pattern study that's going on, the black bear telemetry and behavior study that's going on out there. In the areas that we are revegetating and reforesting, we are doing a study of rabbit response to habitat changes, and we are doing some neotropical bird, migratory bird surveys on the area. The other area that Wildlife and Fisheries has direct responsibility for is a little further south in the basin. It's the Atchafalaya Wildlife Management Area, located in St. Mary, St. Martin, and Iberia parishes, and it's composed of about 26,300 acres that is accessible only by boat. It is an area composed primarily of wooded swamp and bottomland hardwood species on the higher ridges and spoil banks, and the principal activity that we are involved in on that management area is hunting and fishing, promoting of hunting and fishing activities, active management for game and non-game species, and preservation of wildlife and wetland habitat. Even further south in the basin, we have a much larger area, 135,000 acre Atchafalaya Delta Wildlife Management Area, most of which is open water. Emergent land in that area is only about 8,000 acres out of the 135,000. We are growing property down there. It's one of the few places on the coast of Louisiana where we are gaining property. Most of the other areas in the state are losing property at a considerable rate. However, the Atchafalaya Delta and Wax Lake Outlet Delta are growing pretty substantially. The principal activities that we have going on in that area involve some coordination with the Corps and other agencies in actively managing the natural deposition and the spoil deposition from dredging in the area to encourage delta development and growth. We, of course, have hunting and fishing activities going on down there. We are monitoring the delta development constantly to kind of keep an idea of what's happening down there. Active management of flow distribution through sediment trapping. Management of fur, waterfowl and fur bearers on the area is a major activity. And habitat improvement project currently going on Big Island involves timber stand improvement and encouraging understory development and succession setback to kind of keep it in an early successional stage to maintain the maximum amount of understory, cover, browse for the animals that are utilizing the area. We also are very pleased to announce that we have a tremendous amount of mottled duck production and nesting and utilization on the smaller islands throughout the basin, throughout the delta itself. One of the major impacts that was felt throughout the Atchafalaya Basin was, of course, Hurricane Andrew. And we had a considerable amount of post-Hurricane Andrew activity going on out there, including fish kill investigations, which we did in conjunction, as mentioned, with DEQ. There were approximately 182 million fish killed in Hurricane Andrew storm surge that came through the Atchafalaya Basin. As a result of that, the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries stocked approximately 3,634,700 fish back into the basin over the next year or next 6 months to a year. Those included about 462,000 Florida largemouth bass, 636,000 northern largemouth bass, 1,134,000 channel catfish, 21,000 blue cat, 1,375,000 bluegill, 6,000 crappie, and about 110 striped bass in the area. Our Inland Fisheries Division continues to monitor the fish populations in the basin. The department implemented emergency rule changes immediately after Hurricane Andrew, designed to limit the take of sport fish in the basin and to assure recovery of the resource. A portion of the dire emergency monies that we received as a result of the damage from Hurricane Andrew, which came to the state, are being used to assess neotropical migratory bird populations in the basin, also being used in conjunction with some fish studies, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about as a separate topic in just a second. You've heard a lot about the coastal management 404 permitting process. The Department of Wildlife and Fisheries is actively involved, as with many of these other agencies, in interfacing directly with the Corps of Engineers and the Coastal Management Division of DNR in commenting on these 404 permits and coastal use permits, providing technical assistance to them, providing resource information to them, making recommendations for mitigation and or project modifications in an attempt to try to reduce overall damage that would result from these projects that are having to be permitted. The recommendations go directly to the agencies that are permitting and do not always necessarily go to the applicant, although the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries encourages any applicant who has a permit that they're trying to get in any wetland, and that includes the Atchafalaya Basin, to come talk to us up front. We don't like surprises any more than these applicants do, and if we can talk up front and work out a lot of these problems prior to sending our comments to the Corps, we can short circuit a lot of problems and speed up the permitting process through the Corps of Engineers and through Coastal Management. Our aquatic plant control section under our Inland Fish Division has 2 crews that are working the basin on a consistent basis. This is a major undertaking with very few people and very little funds. The money that we're getting to try to control aquatic weeds in the basin, water hyacinth being the primary culprit, is not really adequate. All we can do is fight holding actions. The state of Florida spends more money on one species of aquatic weed control alone than we spend on the entire section. So we're hurting. Our research that we were talking earlier with the dire emergency funds, with the cooperative research unit, Dugan alluded to it earlier, we're looking at flow redistribution in the basin, the patterns of flow out there to try to prevent or avoid or at least predict what may happen the next time we have a storm surge like occurred from Hurricane Andrew, to try to get water redistribution out there to eliminate pockets of deoxygenated water, to eliminate pockets where we've got sediment problems that may result in lower mortalities the next time we have that kind of a problem. The last thing I want to talk about is also the Inland Fish Division, and that's the fish sampling and stock assessment that's going on out there. In addition to monitoring the effects of Hurricane Andrew, the Inland Fish Division is conducting a widespread basin survey. They're conducting creel censuses, doing electrofishing and fish sampling populations with hoop nets and other devices, doing age and growth studies on bass, crappie, and catfish, conducting genetic research on Florida bass populations, doing some limited water quality sampling in conjunction with the fish collections. Those are some of the areas where the department is actively involved in the Atchafalaya Basin. We're also actively involved with all of these agencies up here in every aspect of what's going on out there. We're not always kept up to speed all the time like we'd like to be with a lot of the projects that are going on, but we find out through almost daily contact with all of these agencies, and sometimes through contact with the general public, notifying us of things that are happening, what's going on. And we want to keep our finger on the pulse. And once again, welcome to the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. We appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wood. Next is another fisheries organization, the National Marine Fisheries Service. Representing that organization this evening is Mr. Ricky Ruksaman, who is Chief of the Baton Rouge Field Branch Habitat Conservation Division.
The National Marine Fisheries Service is the federal natural resource trustee responsible for the management and conservation of marine fishery resources and their habitats. Because of that responsibility,